Like to call the meeting, the Kankakee County Board meeting for March 12th to order. Good morning. Today's invocation is from Ray Fairfield.
Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you today to ask you for your blessings on this meeting and all those present here today. We gather here to make decisions for our community and county. I pray that you will give each of us your wisdom and discernment as we discuss and vote on issues that affect the residents of this county. Thank you for your guidance, understanding, and wisdom. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And if I could, please get a roll call.
Mr. Washington.
Present.
Mr. Lajas. Mr. Olthoff. Mr. Hess. Present. Mr. Tholen. Mrs. Polk.
Present.
Mr. Snipes. Mr. Byrne.
Present.
Mr. Seroy.
Present.
Mr. Lear.
Present.
Mrs. Weber.
Present.
Mrs. Peters. Mr. Payton.
Present.
Mrs. Parker.
Present.
Ms. Dunbar. Mr. Ritter. Mr. Kinzinger.
Present.
Mr. Fairfield.
Present.
Mr. Zenz.
Present.
Ms. Haas.
Present.
Mr. Carrico.
Present.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Present.
Mr. Smith.
Present.
Mr. Swanson.
Present.
Ms. Zakulo.
Present.
Mr. Featherling.
Present.
Mr. Donnell. Mr. Wheeler.
Present.
Yeah.
We have a quorum. Under public comment today, I have Chad Miller from the farm. Did I pronounce that correctly? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for inviting me to speak. Thank you, members of the County Board. The Farm Bureau strongly supports the concept of agritourism as a way to promote and market agricultural and associated agricultural products. The Kankakee County Regional Planning Commission, of which I'm a member, along with the County Planning Department staff, spent a considerable amount of time constructing the agritourism ordinance draft you have before you. We feel that what we've put together is solid, but flexible enough to allow for consideration of forward-thinking concepts we have not thought of yet. The Farm Bureau encourages your support of this agritourism ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Kelsey McGrath from Mantino.
Thank you, Chair.
You're on.
Thank you, Chairman Wheeler and the County Board members for the opportunity to come before you today. My name is Kelsey McGrath, Communications Coordinator at the Kankakee County Convention and Visitors Bureau. Our Director, Stacy Wilkin, is in Springfield today, meeting with legislators advocating for tourism in Kankakee County and was unable to attend. She has prepared remarks in support of the agritourism ordinance proposed on today's agenda. As the destination marketing organization charged with the promotion of tourism in Kankakee County, it is our privilege to work alongside the creative minds that find a way to incorporate agriculture into an experience worth visiting. We serve as storyteller for 22 communities throughout Kankakee County, each with their own unique identity. One of our greatest stories that we can tell is the history of agriculture in Kankakee County, and as the world changes, it's our job to keep up. We work on behalf of farms and markets across the county to promote their unique experience to a regional audience in our printed publications, digital content campaigns, and social media. Whether it's dining at a 100-foot handcrafted table under the stars, visiting one of the best farmers market in the state, or making memories at pumpkin patches and tree farms, we are grateful for the vision to bring visitors to the Kankakee River Valley. The ordinance before you today is proof that Kankakee County is positioning itself for future growth in all areas of tourism. Thank you to Mr. Skimmerhorn, Mr. Miller, and the Regional Planning Commission for meticulously working through the process to be a community that allows us to showcase our agricultural roots to allow the dreams of small business owners and farmers to come true. We thank you for the opportunity to be involved and ask for your support in the agritourism ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on, Certificates of recognition. I have Robert LaLuna, 25 years at the Highway Department. Bob's not here. Alrighty. The minutes of the last meeting from February 11th, 2019. I need a motion to approve the minutes. Mr. Byrne, Mr. Payton with a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Same sign. Motion carries. Claims Committee reports.
Mr. Chairman and members of the County Board, your Committee on County Claims would beg leave to report they've examined the following claims presented and recommend payment. The clerk is hereby authorized and directed to issue orders to the several claimants payable out of the funds as follows. The Highway Fund, $363,024.08. All other funds, $218,543.32, for a total for the month of January 2018 of $581,567.40. For the General Fund, $853,033.87. All other funds, $3,341,967.81, for a total for the month of January 2018 of $4,195,001.68.
Thank you. I need a motion to approve. Excuse me. Mr. Ackhoff, second, Mr. Swanson. All those, that's a roll call vote.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Pope.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Byrne.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Zenz.
Aye.
Ms. Haas.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Ms. Zakulo.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. It's good to see positive numbers, isn't it? Been a while. Moving on to department reports.
The County Collector's Monthly Report for January 2019. Total cash and bank and investments, $504,184.64. County Treasurer's Monthly Report for January 2018. Total cash and investments, $504,184.64. Finance Department Report for January 2019. Total cash accounts and total checking accounts and cash, $10,696,673.55. General fund deficit balance of $5,025,950.05. Coroner's Monthly Report for January 2019. Total calls 113. Coroner's cases 12. Autopsies 4. Toxicology 4. Outside autopsies 2. X-rays 1. Cremations 49. 2 incomplete. Fees for the coroner for the month of January 2019, $3,267.29. Circuit Clerk Cash Book for January 2019. Total dispersed $320,152.88. Recorder's Monthly Report for January 2019. Disbursement fees paid to the County Treasurer, $106,547. County Clerk's Monthly Report for January 2019. Total fees, $30,685.84. Animal Control Monthly Report for January 2019. Total funds submitted to the County Treasurer, $33,622. In the IPTIP Building Fund, $322.17. Total animals handled, 78. The Kankakee County Monthly Building Division Report for January 2019. Total permits issued of 15. Fees of $10,073. Total extra fees of $3,565 for a total of $13,638. The monthly resolution list for March 2019. Total to the county, $26,367.21. And on file is the Compliance Review 78, receipt and distribution of motor fuel tax funds by the county period January 2016 through December 2017. And the Compliance Review Supplemental 57, receipt and distribution of township bridge funds by the county road districts January 2016 through December 2017.
We need to note that there, we're gonna check on this page.
This is what was submitted to us.
Okay. Alrighty. if you look, just to mention that if you look at one of the reports, Mr. Kinzinger noted that there was a page 6 that was not attached. We were going to check back with, is page 5 that was not attached. It said page 4 of 5, and then there was not another page. So we're going to check with Mr. Rogers before we actually put that on file to make sure that that was not an omission. But I think it would be the exception. So that was a good catch there. We'll make sure that it's complete. So we're just asking that you approve it at this time, and then we'll add that page in. So with that, need a motion to approve the reports. Mr. Byrne, second. Ms. Haas? Yes, Mr. Lear. Just a moment.
The compliance reports, this is new, as I recall. Do you know why we had these added?
Yeah, that was, and actually, Mark, if you want to explain a little bit about it, you know, this was something that came in from Highway this month, so I'll let him tell the group.
We had a compliance review done here about 2 months ago. They just require that we put them on file with the board. So there were no issues found. There were no findings.
Correct. Yeah, it was. And is this done periodically every 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, it's supposed to be done about every year, but
Okay.
they were. You can see this one's for 2 years, so
Okay.
they were kind of behind. So
Okay.
yes.
Got it. Thank you. Any other questions? We have a motion and a second, I believe. And that's a voice vote. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Under the consent agenda, is there anything that needs to be removed to be discussed separately? Mr. Snipes?
House Bill 3680.
Okay. Anything else? Mr. Kinzinger? Okay. Memorial policy and procedure. So those do not have, yeah, they're not resolutions. They're just up for discussion, just so you know. We'll make sure that we know that. Any others? All righty, I guess I need a motion to combine and approve those. Mr. Fairfield, second, Mr. Lear. That'll be a roll call vote, please, on those.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk. Aye. Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Byrne.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Zenz.
Aye.
Ms. Haas. Mr. Carrico. Mr. Eckhoff. Mr. Smith. Mr. Swanson. Ms. Zakulo. Mr. Featherling. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. All right, moving on to 36, support of House Bill 3680. First, a motion to approve that be in order. Mr. Zenz is second. Mr. Featherling. All right, and Mr. Snipes, your question, sir.
Yeah, I find it very hard to support this legislation, especially after I looked at the conversation that was had. It appears here that Jake Lee follows the law, and that we're saying don't follow the law or change the law. From shall, which is mandatory, to may, which is kind of discretionary. I do believe that you all took this to the Attorney General, and she, at that time, she did not respond. And generally when they don't, either they feel that it's not a germane issue for them to deal with, stick with the law, or they're saying the law is clear in this fact and we don't need to basically address it. But what I found offensive is the conversation that takes place and then an approval of this resolution. The auditor is the watchdog, is the public watchdog of this community. They are just the check and balances. This gentleman that we have as an auditor has 2 bachelor's degrees. One is in accounting. The other thing is that he has an individual that works with him. He also has not only 2 bachelor's, but he has a master's from the University of Illinois. I have a problem when you have leadership that sits on this particular board, and you equate or even suggest that an individual should be likened to less than 1% of 1% of something that happened in LaSalle County. Out of 102 counties, you pick LaSalle, and you basically state that the auditor's office needs this because we know what's best for us, and so therefore the state doesn't, and everybody else has to follow this law, but we don't want to follow this law. We have taken upon ourselves to basically have a financial oversight department. The auditor says, I have no problem with it, but it's in violation of the state law. He's doing what's right. But when we turn around and state less than 1% of 1% of an individual who y'all found in LaSalle County out of 102 counties to say, and then equate it with this gentleman, that calls for an apology from this particular, from the chairman of this board. Also, you say that you got people that's on board with this. I looked, out of 102 counties, you got 6. So that means you are less than 1% in the 6. That, and if I didn't like it, I'd be calling for a voluntary resignation of the chairman from doing this. This steps on the board of you saying nothing personal, but if it's not up under the color of racism, it's at very least blatant prejudice, sprinkled with discrimination, and then it's topped with ethnic degradation. This man's integrity in the paper. I would never want to read nothing like this from a board. It should have never came up in the conversation. Keep it professional. I'm getting calls all over because I didn't look at the article until it's put in my face and they said, look at this. This man is, he has children in the district. He's a taxpayer. And then we have to have a sidebar conversation. You're gonna have the meetings just simply say, this is what I wanna do. But though you didn't say he was still, you emphasized twice this person from the South. She wasn't black. She wasn't even Hispanic. She was white. How does that equate to Mr. Lee? Keep this board professional. Don't put no garbage like this in the paper. This is upsetting. You don't do this. So therefore, this bill, after I read it, no. We need financial oversight. And I'm not going to say that the law needs to be changed because we want to change it. No.
All right. Well, the only thing I'll respond to is I guess to clarify some facts that were misrepresented in that. There are only 12 counties in Illinois where there's an elected auditor that's also mandated to be the accountant. There is a clear conflict with that accounting and auditing being in the same office. There are 6 other counties out of the now 9 counties that are affected by this because it was amended to 200,000 population, between 200,000 and 75,000. 6 of those 9 counties also support this House bill. Every accountant that I've ever talked to says you can't be both the accountant and the auditor. This bill does nothing to remove the duties of an elected auditor watchdog that is supposed to be watching and should be watching everything. We've always encouraged that throughout this whole process. To call this racial is actually silly. It's offensive to me, and it's offensive to the other people on this board that believe in controls and checks and balances.
Speak for themselves.
They have.
No, they haven't.
They
need to speak to me.
Well, they can speak to everybody, and all I'm saying is that this is about professionalism. And for 2 years, I've been trying to move accounting into the auditor's office, but his opinion of accounting is everything that has to do with finance. He's openly said, I want the finance director fired, and all those employees can potentially be hired into my office. So I will tell you that we handle the finances of the county. And if this bill does not pass, we will move accounting into the auditor's office, which ever since January of 2017, that I have said has to happen because it's the state law. We have had a difference on the definition of what accounting is, and every accountant that I've talked to has a difference than what our county auditor feels accounting is. These are not people that work for the county or do any business with the county. Those folks at the same time have the same opinion, by the way, our outside auditors. The Attorney General did not act on this for two reasons. First of all, we asked the Attorney General to define accounting for us. They refused to do so because there's a case in court right now that the Tazewell County Auditor is suing because they're saying that they're suing their county board because they're saying they don't have enough money to discharge the duties of their office. They cut their budget. So the Attorney General, not for the reasons you stated, they specifically said why they're not going to comment on this case right now. So I'm personally offended by your accusation of racism, Mr. Snipes, and I will not be resigning any day soon. You can call for whatever you want to. This has never been about personal issues. It's been about the business before this board and me protecting $4.5 million of federal money that we get from the federal government. That if we fail the single audit standards by having the same fox in the hen house, I never said, and I actually said in the newspaper, Mr. Lee would never do anything like that. But that's why the federal government doesn't give you money. If you have that system set up to where it could happen, they don't. And what's worse is they take it back after you've spent it. So is there anybody else that has comment on this? Ms. Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to go on record to say I am saddened and disappointed that racism had to be brought in to this issue today. I'm saddened. I thought it was unnecessary.
Any other comments? Mr. Byrne?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to second Ms. Parker on that.
Mr. Chairman? Yeah, hold on, Mr. Featherling. Get your right mic here. Can't believe
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd also like to let it be known that I agree with what's been said so far. Everything, whenever there's an issue or problem, I really don't like to see it come up as racial. I don't see any reason for it.
Mr. Lear?
Chairman, to return to the substance of the bill, I think you've explained in very clear detail the importance of having an adjustment in the state statutes. Clearly, when the federal government announced what the accounting standards were that needed to be followed, the state legislature, probably in part because there were so few counties affected, really hadn't paid attention to what was going on, and it was your initiative to call this attention to the state legislature that's going to make an important change. So I want to speak in behalf of House Bill 3680.
Is there anyone on this board that feels this is a racial situation? Has it ever been about that?
Never.
Let's pull your comment back, because I have the right to address. I said I would have perceived it as, but that changed. I said perceived. So you have to watch your words when you start talking about Snipes. You said racial. I said, but it is blatant, and I specifically said prejudice sprinkled with discrimination, coupled with ethnic degradation. What I'm talking about has nothing to do with so much of the House bill as it is the content that was expressed.
Turn his mic on.
He noted. Now, who is the he in this? That's you. He noted LaSalle County Auditor Jody Wilkerson and two of her staffers were recently indicted for theft and official misconduct. What does that have to do with date? And you specifically said the county would need another person or two to check the auditor if it moved the accounting functions back to the auditor's office. We have auditors that check.
Mr. Eckhoff,
I'd like to call the question.
is there a second to call the question? Mr. Smith, all those in favor of calling the question?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. So we have a motion and a second on the original motion. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Abstain.
Nay. Abstain. Mr. Snipes.
No.
Mr. Byrne.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mr. Payton, Mrs. Parker,
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger,
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield,
Aye.
Mr. Zenz,
Aye.
Ms. Haas,
Aye.
Mr. Carrico,
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Mr. Swanson,
Aye.
Ms. Zakulo,
Aye.
Mr. Featherling,
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye, motion carries. It should be mentioned that all of these will be just sent out as letters anytime we support a bill, or do not support a bill specifically. It will be sent out as a letter to our legislators. That's the way that we do things here. Entirely disappointing. Okay, moving on. We have another one that was pulled out. Oh, the
Memorial policy.
memorial policy. Alrighty, first of all, a motion to approve the policy so we can get into discussion. Mr. Washington, second. Go with Mr. Smith. Your question, Mr. Kinzinger?
I would like to see that policy more restrictive and perhaps a 20 or 25-year service to the county, and that the chairman of the board would have the same bunting if they had served as an elected official for 20 to 25 years. But there should be some criteria as to the length of time served. Why? Because I think that, for instance, if you serve 4 years on the county board and you pass, I'm not certain anybody knows why the bunting's on the door.
No, it's not a county board.
That was just my comments.
Is that your comment? All right, does anyone else have any thoughts on that? Mr. Lear?
Mr. Kinzer, as I read this, this does not apply to county board members unless they're currently elected or a majority of the board requests it. So these are going to be countywide elected officials that served one term. If they are a countywide elected official, it is more likely that people remember them even if it was only one term. County board members, I could see your point, but as I read the policy, it does not apply to county board members unless they're currently elected or a majority requests it.
Any other thoughts on that? Mr. Snipes?
When I served on this board in 1990, I believe it was in 1992, there was kind of a consistency of the board because, as with anyone else that passed, if you serve on this particular board, I think it's within, just out of respect, that we have a bunting. Everyone else does in government, especially when you are a elected official as far as a county, or you were the mayor or the alderman, or if you was a state rep or wherever, they put the bunting out in respect and in honor of your service to this particular board. I still think that needs to be done. Anytime a board member passes, it shouldn't have to be longevity. The very fact that you was elected by the people, that you basically served upon this board and basically gave your service, I think you as an individual need to have that respect given to you. So there was an old adage by one of the pastors says, that was quoting from an old proverb that says, there's an old duck that doesn't praise his own pond. But in this case, giving respect to anyone that has served as a member of this board, whether it was 1 year or 2,000 years, which we know that's not going to be the case. Unless you but I think that person needs to basically be honored as just a respect when a person passes on or dies. It's just a given respect. So I don't think that it takes a quorum of the board to basically make that decision. I just think out of respect, it doesn't cost us anything as far as putting the bun out there, no more than a respect. And I know that everybody's not going to die at the same time. So therefore, we need to honor, hopefully that's not the case. We need to kind of honor anyone that has served upon this board. So therefore, I support just putting the bun up when a member of the board passes.
Any other thoughts? We would need a motion to amend if you want to do so. If you want to make it to every county board member who's ever served on the board.
I make a motion that we honor any county board member that has served upon this board to put to place a budding out in its passing as a respect.
Is there a second to that motion? Second from Ms. Sekulo. Then any other discussion on that point? Need a voice vote on.
Roll call.
A roll call vote, please.
Mr. Washington. Mr. Hess.
Nay.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Byrne.
Nay.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear. Nay. Mrs. Weber.
Nay.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Nay.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Nay.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Zenz.
Nay.
Ms. Haas.
Nay.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Nay.
Mr. Smith.
Nay.
Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Ms. Akulo.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Nay.
Mr. Wheeler.
Nay.
Motion fails.
Motion fails.
8 to
Count.
13.
8 to 13.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Hess.
I'd like to explain my nay answer. If the board would happen to miss somebody, you know, that would be, pardon the expression, a kick in the teeth to that family member who served on the board. There's a lot of times that people have moved out of the area and stuff like that you don't get a notification. And that is the reason my answer was nay.
Alrighty, and do we have a motion and a second on the original motion?
Yes.
Okay. Alrighty, any other questions about that? That can be a voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries. That'll be inserted in the policy and procedure manual. It's not an ordinance. Alrighty, moving on. Under PZA, if I could get the title read into the resolution, or the title read into the record.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois regarding ZBA case 19-01, text amendment to sections 121-99 and 121-100, addition of agritourism regulations to the A1 Agriculture District and A2 Agriculture Estates District.
Motion to approve would be in order. Mr. Featherling, Mr. Eckhoff with a second. Would you like to see a short presentation on this about what agritourism is, or would you like to head on to the vote?
Make a motion to go along with the vote.
Huh?
I think he's calling the question.
I just was asking the board if they, and I heard somebody say they would like to see what it is. That wasn't part of PZA. Yeah, if you could do a kind of a summary, run through it real quick. Thanks, Del.
Quick, Kelly, can you switch over here? Okay. About a year ago, we were asked by the county board chairman to look into development of an agritourism ordinance. We had noticed that there were several operations popping up around the county, and we had really no regulations in place for them to follow. So we, over the course of the last several months, worked with the Regional Planning Commission to develop an agritourism ordinance. First thing we found out that Illinois is one of the only states in the Midwest that does not have a statute that addresses agritourism. So we didn't have a lot of guidance from the state statutes on this. We developed our own purpose and intent for it, which states Kankakee County recognizes that the county's tourism industry is interconnected with its rural economy. By allowing the tourism uses related to traditional and new agricultural uses, the county will further advance both tourism and agriculture within the county for the betterment of all. So that was kind of our mission statement in the beginning. Excuse me. What is agritourism? Agriculture plus tourism equals agritourism. One thing it's important to note that we are not regulating the agricultural side of that equation. That is exempt by state statute, and we can't regulate that. So we're looking at the tourism side of this. First thing we look for is a definition. That was a tough one to come up with. Agritourism can mean a lot of things, and everybody has a different idea of what it means. So we came up with a definition on our own that agritourism is defined as any non-agricultural activity which attracts the public to an agricultural operation for promotion, enjoyment, education, and/or active involvement in the agricultural operation. And that's a fairly broad definition, so that can include a lot of different things. One thing through all of our discussions that did seem to keep rising to the top was that agriculture must be the predominant use of the property. You can't have the tourism side of it without the agriculture. So agriculture must exist on the property first and be maintained throughout the agritourism use. So what kind of uses are we talking about? This matrix is a little hard to read, but there's a lot of different ones. Could be retail sales, such as farmers markets, farm stands, gift shops, craft shops. Could be recreation, such as rodeos, equestrian sports, animal shows. Food services could offer picnic areas, concession stands, restaurants, or even banquet halls. Could be tasting facilities, such as wineries, microbreweries, distilleries. Education and participation, tours, hands-on instruction, implement shows. Could be event hosting, such as weddings, parties, concerts, holiday events. Could include lodging too. Could have retreats, bed and breakfasts, guest ranches. Camping could be included. Could have amusements such as festivals, carnivals, live entertainment, and livestock interaction. So could have petting zoos, feeding, animal rides. Now some of these uses do require approvals beyond the county's reach at the state level, and some of them, even a distillery, would be even at the federal level, but it is possible. Now through our discussions with the Regional Planning Commission, we decided not to limit any of these, so we kept them all in. All of them are possibilities, because we wanted people to be creative and just see what happens. So when we get into the regulations, I did not put all of them up here, but some of the things that we did consider was the type of uses, like I talked about. We have parking. That was a big one, because some of the complaints on the ones we do have existing were parking issues, people parking along the roads, blocking roads, not having enough emergency access into the facilities. So we wrote regulations addressing that. Signage, I'm assuming most of these places will want signs for people to know they're there. So we wanted to regulate that. Sanitary facilities such as bathrooms and potable water. Building codes, we did address that. One thing that's interesting is that most agricultural buildings do not have to follow the building codes, or there's limited codes they do have to follow. In this case, you're changing that from an agricultural use to a tourism use, so any buildings used may have to follow the building code, so there may be some retrofitting that would have to occur there. And of course, we cannot exempt anyone from ADA requirements. Setbacks, we looked at that. Hours of operation, and noise limits, and nuisance control. Kind of hard to read up there, but we did address every one of those. You should have the ordinance in front of you if you want more specifics on any of those items. Coverage limitations, since agriculture needs to be the predominant use, we determined that only 40% of any given parcel could be used for tourism. We had capacity limits, lot size minimums. We felt that the lot sizes in the A1 and A2 were already adequate, so there were no additions to that. And we did put a disclaimer in there that other codes, laws, and regulations do need to be followed because some of them, like I said, are outside of our jurisdiction, such as camping. You do have to have a license from Illinois Department of Public Health if you want a campground. So our approach, we divided it up into 3 different permits. There's a temporary permit, which would be good for a single event, 10-day duration, and those would be reviewed and approved by my staff. Then there's a seasonal permit, which is good for 1 year for 12 months, 1 year, and for whatever number of events that you tell us on your application you're going to have. That would follow the normal special use permit process and go to Zoning Board of Appeals and be ultimately approved by the county board. And then there's a permanent permit for somebody who's going to want to do it for an indefinite period of time, which would also follow our normal special use permit process. And that's the quick version.
So, Mr. Smith.
We've got just a couple of questions, Dylan. This may be somewhere else, so you gotta educate me. I can't find anything in reading this, what the permit fees are.
Well, the normal special use permit fee is $600 plus 30 per acre. That's in your
So
zoning
I'm gonna
ordinance.
charge 4-H'er with a farm stand out here $600?
For just a farm stand?
Yeah.
No.
You've got farm stands up here.
That's just a suggestion. Farm stands are already permitted in our ordinance. We didn't change that. Farm stands could be part of an agritourism use. They don't have to be.
I drive around this county and I can tell you where 30 different locations are for farm stands. Produce is put out there for sale.
And
I've never seen a permit.
If that's all they're doing, then they just follow the normal ordinance. But if they want to wrap that up into an agritourism use and have other uses along with it.
I guess what I'm asking, sir, is if my neighbor puts his green peppers and tomatoes out there, is he required to buy a permit for $600?
No. No. That's just a
I
temporary
need to ask,
farm.
is that because it's not a tourism related activity?
Exactly.
This exists for those folks who have farm to table dinners and wedding receptions where they serve beef from the they slaughter their own cows or whatever, or, that whole deal. Music by the campfire. This doesn't we already allow farm stands.
Okay, so I guess I'm just looking at, for lack of a better word, I'll call it overreach by government.
This is actually
grabbing stuff.
This is allowing it to happen. This isn't overreach. This is allowing it to happen. Because before we would have to shut it down because there is no zoning for tourism on agriculture. We wanted to make this happen.
But you're going to charge me $600 if, in your opinion, I now fall under the agritourism approach.
No, not my opinion. It's defined.
Well, no, I'm saying we're writing a county ordinance here, or it's what it looks like to me.
Correct.
To do this. Currently, there is none, right?
Correct. There is nothing there.
Is there a requirement by state law that we have that?
There's a requirement by our zoning that these types of activities could not occur. And so we wanted to allow them to occur, so we created the framework for it to occur. They couldn't do it right now. Because they could have a structure that didn't meet fire code. And so the township fire department would have to shut it down. I mean, you want to explain the situations that led to
This is
this,
mainly about opportunity, giving a lot more opportunity. So it's not, I don't think it's an overreach. It's actually allowing more things to occur. But whenever you have people assembled in a place, there are certain building codes that need to be met to make sure those people are safe. And that's what we're establishing here. As I said, agricultural buildings on their own, a pole barn, doesn't necessarily have to meet building codes.
I understand.
But now if you're going to invite 50 people regularly to come into that pole barn for a banquet or weddings, then it does need to meet the building codes. I think you're focusing on the farm stands. Farm stands are already allowed by our ordinance. So if you just want a farm stand, you can have that. But if you want a farm stand and maybe a petting zoo and a pumpkin patch tour, that's tourism. You're going to need you're going to need agritourism. We had a situation just last week, a lady asked me, she raises horses and has horse shows. Well, that's equestrian sports. If that's all she's doing, it's already okay. But if she wants to link that up with the other uses that are on that list and have a whole facility to attract people there for tourism, then the agritourism. And if it's just a temporary, that we haven't determined the fee for that one yet, but I'm guessing it's going to be around $100 for the temporary permit.
Is there any more on that, Mr. Smith? Okay. Okay. If you think something else, please. Second time. Okay. 12, Mr. Lear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We say this is intended to provide opportunity. Under hours of operation, if we're talking wedding receptions and possibly parties, I don't know, I'm probably at the point in life that I'd leave a wedding reception at 10 o'clock at night, but a Friday or Saturday night, I can see some people wanting to stay a little bit later than 10 o'clock at night. Having to go to the planning director every time, if some of these operations are going to have those kind of events on a fairly regular basis, or hoping to, it seems a little restrictive to me.
Well, the 10 o'clock is in line with the county's noise ordinance. So, and that's what the hours of operation are about. It is a special use permit, so they can ask for special treatment. So if they want to regularly have events past 10 o'clock, they can ask for it. And then this board gets to decide if that's appropriate in that area.
Mr. Snipes.
Kind of feeling the same way with the restricted, because tourism kind of now becomes subjective in that when you look at the borders, it's kind of shady because you can have an event, but say if you had the event while other things are going on in the community, like a Moment's Glad Fest or something, could that be considered part of the tourism? We don't know. When you're saying that they're doing something on their particular property and they need a permit to fine tune the line between when I need to be permit and when it's okay, is really not definitive in this, or you're saying it's okay, but the issue is, where's it in writing so they will know it's okay? And where's that fine line when we're saying it's okay, and the only thing they would have is that they heard it from this meeting, but it might not be definitively laid out in our county code?
I believe it is defined in our county code, and not just this one, but our building codes, are the remainder of our zoning code. You can't just look at this particular ordinance, you have to look at all the codes together, and I believe it defines it very well.
So we're going to assume that the individual that's looking would have to go through everything to define what is considered to be tourism or not? I mean, they don't spend a lot of time. They're just going to go to the county site, see if it's approved or not, and then all of a sudden I don't want them ticketed or having to go. We're using resources and them having to come to a zoning committee to define where that line begins or ends.
I'm not sure I'm following you there. Tourism, as I said by our definition, is very broad-based. Those uses I put up there are only an example of some of the many uses that could be considered agritourism. I'm sure there's some creative people out there that could come up with some more. We're not defining necessarily those uses. You apply for the use you would like to do, show on the application how that promotes your agricultural use, and we'll apply the appropriate building and zoning codes to that particular use. Some agricultural uses don't use any buildings at all, so the building codes would not apply. But if they would like to use a building, especially in a pre-existing building, it will likely have to be retrofitted.
Okay, but
if they're going to build a new building for their agritourism use, then it would have to be built to comply.
Right. So the term is just to building and not building and structure. Because what if they put up a tent? Again.
And that could be.
That's what I'm saying. That's where.
That could very well be, and then the building codes don't really apply to tents.
It doesn't? Does it say that? Because it's,
Not aware of any part of the building code that applies to a tent.
okay, because in the city, they say that the tent is part of a structure. So that's what I'm saying. I don't want to get into the.
I would have to look at that, but, as that question has never came up, but I do not recall anything in there about tents.
Okay.
Anyone else? Mr. Zens?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Del, were any businesses or people who would fall under the purview of this been spoken to regarding it? And
Yes, actually, the owner of Lacavore Farms, I forget her name, actually attended our meetings and contributed.
okay, and what was the outcome of that?
Actually, I believe I have an email with her support of
Okay,
of it. It was very positive.
okay. Anybody else, or was that pretty much it?
That was the only one.
That was the only one. So I mean, we do have some other people who would fall under the purview of this that maybe aren't aware that this is now going to be imposed on them, and we haven't really gotten the feedback. Is that
Not yet. The Convention and Visitor Bureau, I believe, Stacy over there did send out a notice to all of the ones she knew about. Lacavore Farms was the only one that showed up.
okay? Thank you.
Did you have any comments, Mr. Miller, regarding, have you been talking to any of the landowners or business people, the farmers who want to do this? Because you've been part of this process on both Planning Commission and obviously with the Farm Bureau.
Right. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, as part of the Regional Planning Commission, we've been very involved with it. If I can give it a little plug, our County Farm Bureau newspaper goes out to all 4,400 of our County Farm Bureau members monthly, and on the front page on the top for the January issue talks about the agritourism zoning ordinance advancing, and gives an invitation to our Farm Bureau members to be a part of that process, give us some input, receive a draft copy of the ordinance to review. We did have some conversations with a few of our Farm Bureau members about this ordinance and got their input and ultimately their support.
Okay, thank you. The some of the issues that came up, why I asked for this to be explored is because other communities are encouraging this type of activity. We have had situations here, but there was parking on the roads and blocking the roads. Emergency vehicles couldn't get through if they wanted to. The bands were playing until 2:33 in the morning, and the neighbors were complaining. So we had to come up with a frame, and they were in buildings. One building had hay bales with open heaters in it. So, I mean, there was things that had to be addressed, but we want to have that business continue within the county. But there are some things that needed to be addressed. You got to get the cars off the road. You got to be up to fire code, and there are ADA issues as well that have to be addressed. Because it's all subject to that if you do have a business. There's also the health department. If they're cooking food there, they have to do the triple basin wash, and all those codes have to be met unless they're catering in food and they don't cook it there on the premises. So it's just not the county is imposing. They already had, liquor licenses, health department, and then they really had to comply with business codes and the township road rules or the county road rules. So this was a framework to say, have at it. And then, as Del mentioned in committee, at some point we may say, well, this aspect isn't working very well. We need to tweak this. Right. This is going to be kind of a in progress type situation. We'll see how this works for the county. But we know people want to come down here to do this stuff out of Chicago. This is a destination, and it's a good thing. So.
And this is also going to offer a convenience, as Mr. Wheeler was stating. You already needed the health permits and all these other. We're going to give that to them once they apply. We're going to give them all the referral forms they need based on their application. So they won't have to be running around everywhere. They'll know what they need to do.
Sure. Is there any other questions, Ms. Parker?
Thank you, Chairman. I don't have a question. I just want to say that I believe this is endless possibilities for this county. I think a lot of people will be coming down, and just what I've heard today, and once it gets out, more people are going to be involved in this agritourism. I think it's a wonderful idea.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Mr. Washington.
Just a comment. The individual lady that met with us, was very enthusiastic about having more of it and having it regulated. They expect an increase of 50% or more of the people that were coming to their farm in the past. So it's a win-win situation for us.
Any other comments, questions? We have a motion and a second. Let's do a roll call vote. It says it on there. I'm not sure that that's necessary. Yes.
Mr. Washington,
Aye.
Mr. Hess,
Aye.
Mrs. Polk,
Aye.
Mr. Snipes,
Aye.
Mr. Byrne,
Aye.
Mr. Seroy,
Aye.
Mr. Lear,
Aye.
Mrs. Weber,
Aye.
Mr. Payton,
Aye.
Mrs. Parker,
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger,
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield,
Aye.
Mr. Zenz,
Aye.
Ms. Haas,
Aye.
Mr. Carrico,
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff,
Aye.
Mr. Smith, Mr. Swanson,
Aye.
Ms. Zakulo,
Aye.
Mr. Featherling,
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Moving on. If you could just read that brief title into the record, please.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois regarding Kankakee County zoning map amendments 2019.
Need a motion to approve to start with. Mr. Burns, second. Mr. Kinzinger. This went through PZA, all of our zoning map changes. Was there any questions to any of this? All right, hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign, motion carries. Next item.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois regarding adopting the Kankakee County Natural Hazards Mitigation Plan.
Motion to approve the hazard mitigation plan. Mr. Eckhoff, second. Mrs. Parker. Any questions? Voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Next item, item 50.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois regarding resolution authorizing execution and amendment of Section 5311 grant agreement.
Motion to approve. Mr. Hess, second. Mrs. Polk. Any questions about that? Mr. Kinzinger.
One of ignorance on my part. What is that grant agreement?
Find it here.
That's
It's part of the transportation
okay,
grant, but
that's
I have to
fine.
look.
I can address
specifically.
that if you'd like.
Sure, go ahead.
That is the federal grant money for our rural transit.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Let's do a roll call on that, because there may be expenditures associated with that. Yeah.
Mr. Washington,
Aye.
Mr. Hess,
Aye.
Mrs. Polk,
Aye.
Mr. Snipes,
Aye.
Mr. Byrne,
Aye.
Mr. Seroy,
Aye.
Mr. Lear,
Aye.
Mrs. Weber,
Aye.
Mr. Payton,
Aye.
Mrs. Parker,
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger,
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield,
Aye.
Mr. Zenz,
Aye.
Ms. Haas,
Aye.
Mr. Carrico,
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Mr. Swanson,
Aye.
Ms. Zakulo,
Aye.
Mr. Featherling,
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Item 51.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois regarding resolution authorizing execution and amendment of downstate operating assistance grant agreement.
Motion to approve is in order. Mr. Hess, second. Mr. Carrico. Any questions about that item? Basically in tandem with the other grant.
This would be the state. This would be the state portion.
Yep. Roll call vote then.
Mr. Washington,
Aye.
Mr. Hess,
Aye.
Mrs. Polk,
Aye.
Mr. Snipes,
Aye.
Mr. Byrne,
Aye.
Mr. Seroy,
Aye.
Mr. Lear,
Aye.
Mrs. Weber,
Aye.
Mr. Payton,
Aye.
Mrs. Parker,
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger,
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield, Mr. Zenz,
Aye.
Ms. Haas,
Aye.
Mr. Carrico,
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff,
Aye.
Mr. Smith,
Aye.
Mr. Swanson,
Aye.
Ms. Zakulo,
Aye.
Mr. Featherling,
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. The motion carries. Moving on to number 52. It's If you could read that title into the record, please.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois regarding general interfund borrowing accounts as of November 30th, 2018.
Need a motion to approve this resolution. Mr. Lear, second, Mr. Featherling. Any questions about the interfund borrowing resolution? Totals are in your packet. Mr. McCarty's waiting in the wings to answer any deep probing questions. I just want to, note, it continually goes down. We keep borrowing less from ourselves, if you will. The one aberration was, it appears that in 2017 we borrowed more, but that actually is because the snapshot on the 30th of the month was that. A couple days later, we got our tax disbursement from the treasurer. So in actuality, we really borrowed about $900,000 less than that number. So it has been on a downward trend, really since, I think 15 was the high point, wasn't it? Yeah, 15 was when it got really, really bad. So 16, 17, and 18, we're on a trend. Hopefully, we don't, in a couple of years, we won't have to borrow any money from ourselves anymore, or banks. Any other questions? That's a roll call vote.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Pope.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Byrne.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Zenz.
Aye.
Ms. Haas.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Ms. Zakulo.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Moving on to highways and buildings. It's just a concurring resolution.
Correct.
I need a motion to waive the reading of the resolution and adopt as presented. Mr. Carricos and Mr. Byrne, the second. Any questions about this? Paying the highway bills, basically? Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Pope.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Byrne.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Zenz.
Aye.
Ms. Haas.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Ms. Zakulo.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Other business. Excuse me. One opening on the Ethics Commission, one on the Lewis Drainage District, one on Grinnell Special Drainage District, one opening on the Gar Creek Drainage District, two on Mantino number 3 drainage, one on Mantino number 9 drainage, one on Minnie Creek drainage, one on Momentum Yellowhead Drainage District, one opening on the Kankakee County Housing Authority Board, and one opening on the University of Illinois Extension Committee, and that is a county board member. I have had no one express interest to this point. Let me know with an application, please, if you do want to serve on the extension board. Any old business today? Mr. Snipes.
Just want to clarify and to make sure that there's an understanding here. Today I said if. Never said the name, just said if. And all of a sudden, individuals say, oh, am I a racist, am I this, or am I that? What I need you to understand is that using the word if doesn't say that you are or not unless you claim it or own it. In this case, the language that we use, fox in the hen house, it when it's parallel with the auditing of stealing. And has already been said in past meetings that he stole a book. I think we need to be cautious with our words. If you don't want that to shadow this particular board, then as a leader of this board and as leaders in this room, we have to make sure that that is not done. Everyone is a professional. Whether I agree with you or not, it's one thing, but to utilize terms outside of what I consider to be professional, I'm going to stand against. I don't care if it's 27-1. I'll be the one to stand against it. We don't. Folks have children in this community, relatives. So we have to be careful what we say. I don't agree with everything that people say, but if I don't, we just agree not to agree. But I'm not going to bring inferences from outside to basically paint some picture. He took exception to it, I would too. Anyone, if I'd have made these comments to you, would have taken exception to it because of the way it was presented. And what I'm saying is we need to keep it professional, because you have to understand the way you perceive it and the way others perceive it is two different perceptions. And we don't want that perception to ever permeate this county or into communities that feel offensive by an individual that's just basically dealing with the law. If we ever disagree with the law, use what you have to do to change it. I don't want to ever see this, and I don't care if I do see it again, I'm going to bring it up again. Watch your words as leaders. And in this case, as the leader of this particular board, anytime you move, I have to move. Whatever you say, I'm saying, if I'm authorized, if I don't agree with something, don't put it out there in public, then I don't have to address it public. But if you put it out there in public, or they got it in public, that's why you have these little cameras up here. Once it gets to public, then the perception goes in a kaleidoscope. And I don't need to hear from my constituents or from any other individuals in the room. What is he calling this man? What's the problem? Keep it professional. I'm done.
Anybody else? Motion to adjourn. Mr. Hess. Mr. Kulo, all those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Have a good day, everyone.